Hello and welcome back to the Cozy Design Studio, or if you're new here, welcome, my name is Nick, and I like talking about all things cozy. Today, that's my new favorite controller, the 8bitdo Pro 3, and we'll be exploring why this is, I think, the ideal layout, form factor, and design philosophy for a controller, as well as why I might be wrong. So, let's start with probably the most controversial opinion I have about this thing, the layout. I personally think the symmetrical approach this controller takes, in keeping with the PlayStation tradition, is the superior one. I personally find having the sticks next to each other like this makes for a much more comfortable experience, and I have absolutely no difficulty accessing all of the other buttons that I might need to with this layout. Now, I know a lot of people hold the opinion that the Xbox style, where the D-pad and left stick are switched, makes more sense, and logically I should agree. After all, most games use the left stick for movement and the right stick for camera control, so swapping the position of the left stick and the D-pad should theoretically make for a much more comfortable experience. That way, you can keep one finger firmly planted on the face buttons and the other on the movement control you're going to use most often, given that most games will automatically control the camera for you anyway. And because that right thumb is used for the face buttons, it's much more conditioned to swapping back and forth between positions anyway, whereas your left thumb only has to think about the movement and only very occasionally switch to the D-pad, which is far less utilized than the face buttons in most modern games. So the logic roughly follows this formula. The most used controls are at the top half of the controller, and the auxiliary controls are put on the lower half and set in a bit, allowing your thumb to comfortably pivot down in its natural arc to access them. Now, like I said, this makes logical sense, and I think for lots of games it might well be the most ideal layout. However, I've never personally found it to be particularly intuitive. I know people say that it's the best layout, and they might have good reasons to think that, but I actually think for a lot of games, this more symmetrical layout is ideal. Now, I'm sure you have a game that you can think of which would benefit from the Xbox layout, and I'm sure you're right. However, I think in the vast majority of games, this is the far more comfortable positioning. Think about it. For something like an FPS game, which is the genre most said to benefit from the Xbox style layout, which of these thumb positionings looks more comfortable? I would argue it's the one on the right, where your thumbs naturally rest on the sticks to control movement and aiming, only briefly having to move to the rather awkward positioning of reaching for the face buttons or D-pad. Whereas with the Xbox style layout, at least one thumb is constantly resting out of its natural position. Now, I know little to nothing about RSIs or repetitive strain injuries, so I can't say clinically speaking if this could actually cause issues down the line, but what I will say is that in general, when products are designed with ergonomics in mind, they aim to put the hands in their most natural resting position, because deviating from that position engages the forearm muscles and puts those tendons and nerves under stress. And putting those tendons and nerves under stress for prolonged periods is generally what causes RSIs. So to my mind, most people should find the PlayStation-style symmetrical design more comfortable, because in games where you're often using both sticks like shooters, your thumbs are going to be in their natural resting position for the longest duration. Now, I want to be clear, video game controllers are actually probably one of the most ergonomic solutions in gaming input that we have. They avoid a lot of the positions that cause classic computer-related RSIs like carpal tunnel, and they can be easily used from your lap, which means you can prevent contact stress from laying your forearms on the desk. And because you can get away from your desktop, they actually make it easier to set up your monitor at a comfortable height. They really do have a lot of ergonomic advantages, so what I really don't want you taking away from this is that you should be scared you're going to get an RSI from using the wrong controller. And on the whole, every mass market controller that I've used has been roughly the same level of comfortable. So it really is splitting hairs to say that the Xbox layout is less comfortable. However, if we're looking for the most ideal layout of the two, I think the PlayStation-style symmetrical approach does win out. But comfort isn't the only thing we care about with controllers. We also care about style, and more than most people like to admit. Style and substance. This controller has style in spades. I think it, and honestly all of 8bitdo's controllers, are the most aesthetically appealing on the market. More so than other third-party controllers, and more so than even first-party controllers, 8bitdo's design just has that extra something to it. Now, there is, of course, the obvious of the retro hardware inspiration, the beige or retro gray colorway, or even the more fun GameCube orange and purple, but aside from the nostalgia bait, as I suppose you could call it, the actual form factor is just brimming with inspiration and innovation. 8bitdo's Pro line of controllers draws specific inspiration from the SNES line of retro consoles. And if you want to hear more about my thoughts on the design of the SNES and its Japanese counterpart, the Super Famicom, make sure you check out this video that I did a little while ago, but their controllers are iconic. The SNES controller has probably stuck in the collective gaming imagination more than any other piece of hardware. And for the Nintendo games releasing in the early 90s, this was really all you needed. It has no triggers and no thumbsticks, so the very simple design totally works ergonomically. It's perhaps a bit difficult to hold if you're used to more modern controllers, but frankly, it didn't really need much improvement for the games available for its accompanying system. However, as the 8bitdo Pro controllers are for more modern audiences and more modern games, they do need to add a few more bells and whistles to retain the usability and make sure they appeal to our more modern sensibilities. So to start with, they add grips to the bottom of the controller. They protrude down just under the lip of that iconic SNES-inspired outline and form a rather PlayStation-esque slim pill-shaped grip. This is as opposed to the more triangular style that the Xbox tends towards. I find this style of grip to be a bit more comfortable personally, as well as just feeling a lot more interesting visually. I find the Xbox approach makes for a much more bulky and a bit bulbous look, which is totally fine, but for my personal preference, I really prefer this more slim and blocked approach. It really lends itself well to making sure the design inspiration shines through because the grips and the body of the controller have a bit of separation with that shadow that the lip here makes. Aside from that, the other big change they've made since the Pro 2 is the addition of 2 more macro buttons by the bumpers. Now, I don't find the positioning here to be all that ideal, plus I don't think I've ever used macro buttons when controllers have them, but hey, they're totally out of the way and they're not likely to be pressed accidentally, so it certainly doesn't hurt to have them. But moving down, we have the really cool combo analog and tactile triggers. Basically, they include a switch next to each trigger, and when flipped into the tactile mode, the triggers become ultra short throw tactile triggers with micro switches instead of the usual analog style. I assume this is for shooters, so you have far less delay between pulling the trigger and the trigger bottoming out. I personally find the analog mode to be more practical, but I'm sure if you're someone who plays shooters on a controller, this would be a great feature. And the feeling of the analog triggers is great. It's weighty and tactile and just feels incredibly premium. Which brings me to the stand, which is another part of this controller which makes it feel premium. This thing is solid as a rock, and I'm not normally one for this style of stand. I personally think it just makes it look a little bit weird when it's docked, but that's something I can overlook for the convenience that this affords. Now, I know it's a small thing, but I really love that you can just have this plugged in on your desk and it will both charge and connect your controller to your computer. There hasn't been one time that I've picked up this controller and found it to be dead. The workflow is incredibly intuitive and honestly really removes the need to even think about charging. And the connection to my PC has been far more stable than I've experienced with controllers with onboard Bluetooth or 2.4 GHz connections. I don't know why, but I always find myself connecting and reconnecting to make those other controllers work, but with this, it's just a dongle integrated into the dock, and it's always plugged in, paired, and ready to go. Now, I do think I should touch on this controller's use of micro switches. They use them not only in the tactile trigger mode and the bumper macro buttons, but also in the D-pad. And this is going to be fairly contentious for a lot of people. D-pads are one of those things in retro gaming that people really care about, so this is going to be something that a lot of you might not like about this controller. However, I have to say, when playing Silksong on this D-pad, I much preferred this clicky style to the more mushy style that seems to be the most popular with retro gamers. I've had issues with those more mushy D-pads causing some misinputs in the past, and I just personally really appreciate the more delineated feedback that you get from this style of D-pad. Plus, it's not like a pure microswitch click. It feels like they do have a membrane in there as well, so it does have just a bit of that mush to it. Though I know for some people that might be a deal breaker, so I do think it's worth mentioning. But just keep in mind, if you're not someone who is like an absolute nerd about D-pads, I think you're likely to appreciate the way this one feels, even if it's not generally accepted as the ideal standard. But let's move on to this controller's big headline-grabbing party trick. It's modular face buttons and joystick toppers. But before we get into that, I want to thank today's sponsor, PCBWay. If you're working on an upcoming project, but you don't have time to sit around and wait for your home printer to finish with your prototype, or you need it in some exotic material or fabrication process, might I suggest PCBWay. They offer every service you might need when working on personal or commercial projects. Everything from FDM printing to full-on injection molding. If you need it, they can do it. They offer high-quality machining services as well as any PCB work you might need. And they don't only offer fabrication, they also work with you and your team to design your own PCB for whatever your project might call for. But if you're more into plug and play, they also have their module store where you can buy all kinds of electrical parts and tools, as well as some awesome projects to work on with the kids. No matter what it is you're making, PCBWay have what you need. So when you need their services, make sure you head over to PCBWay.com to see what they can do for you. So a big thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video, and now back to the video. Modular face buttons and joystick toppers. This is probably one of the most important features about this controller for me personally. Not so much the joystick toppers, but the face buttons absolutely. One of the biggest problems that you run into quite quickly with any controller is the fact that no matter what you do, no one is ever going to be on the same page about face button layouts. All three major players in the console space take a different approach. Xbox, while they at least use the same glyphs as Nintendo, they're placed in exactly the opposite positions. And Sony just uses altogether different face buttons as anyone else. And this has been a problem basically ever since there's been more than one controller on the market. No one wants to simply use one standard layout for whatever reason, so invariably when you have people over to play a game, if any of them don't use the system that you do, you're going to be absolutely inundated with complaints about how objectively wrong this particular layout is, and oh, well, I wouldn't have lost if I had a good controller. And frankly, it can be exhausting. But also, it's not totally invalid. There is zero reason, aside from simple inertia at this point, for everyone not to just pick one standard and go with that. But that's never happened and likely never will, so probably every gamer out there has been on both the receiving end of this complaint and the giving end. But it's not just couch co-op that this affects. 8bitdo also offers a software to change the face button layout of their controllers in an attempt to fix this problem, and most games will let you customize the layout in-game. Plus, you can do it on Steam too. Now, while in the past this has been great if you never have to look at the controller, if you're jumping into a new game and haven't memorized the button layout, it can be really confusing when the screen says to press A and you have to remember to press the button labeled B. And that confusion and friction made for a subpar experience on their older controllers. But this one killer feature solves that issue outright, and the way they do it is particularly elegant. And it makes you ask the question, why is this the first time this has happened? Well, I would guess most third-party manufacturers were thinking there were two potential avenues to solve this issue. The first would be to make the controller user serviceable and then allow the user to open up the controller and install the buttons in the order they want, close it up, and never have to touch it again. The issue with this is that the accounting department really doesn't like it when people are encouraged to open their hardware, because that means that they have to cover a much wider array of user mistakes with their warranty, which theoretically will cost the company more money than if they simply say, don't open your product. So that leaves the second option, modular buttons. buttons you can remove without ever having to delve into the controller itself. You never have to open it up and risk breaking it. And that would be great, except for the fact that controller buttons are very low profile, and adding any kind of mechanical clip or snap-in mechanism that can be easily injection molded will add to the Z height required and potentially make the button feel mushy and just all around bad. The second option opens you up to a lot more potential for failed units as well. More complexity means more failures in production, no matter how good your factory is. So, because this wasn't really an issue that would prevent people from buying a controller, no one cared to solve the problem. But clearly the design team over at 8bitdo had some extra time and decided to differentiate themselves from the other third-party controllers by doing exactly that. They chose the second option, and I think that was the right move. But okay, how did they go about solving this issue? Well, they turned to the most magical substance known to man, magnets. That's right, they use a simple low-profile neodymium magnet embedded into the button itself to allow you to attach and detach the button at will. But magnets only solve the question of how you get the button to stay on. What about the issue of the button's potential to slide around and rotate out of position? Well, they solved that incredibly simply. They just keyed the part of the button that slots into place and gave the walls a slight chamfer so that the magnet could pull the button tight and eliminate any slop. It really is an incredible little bit of design. And listen, it's not groundbreaking, it's nothing particularly impressive from a technical standpoint, so yeah, sure, you could call it very basic and an obvious solution any designer worth their salt could have come up with. But the fact of the matter is, no one else did. So no matter how basic you might think the solution is, it works incredibly well, and it's the first time I've seen it done, and that really is the essence of good holistic design. It takes every factor into account. It's easy to manufacture, it's fairly cheap to implement, it doesn't require opening up the controller and thus pissing off accounting, and it doesn't detract from the feeling of using the buttons. A quick side-by-side comparison shows that these buttons feel exactly the same as any of the buttons on any of their other controllers. The wobble is completely within the tolerance of their other controllers, and the buttons will absolutely not fall off no matter how rough you are on your controllers. I can't think of a single compromise they had to make here, and that is incredibly rare in industrial design. Usually there will be some compromise to a solution like this, but this is one of those rare times when that seems to not be the case. Now, the joysticks are really just there for fun, and they really exemplify 8bitdo's design philosophy. They ship with these awesome little ball-top joystick toppers to give you that classic arcade feel, but I mean, realistically, no one's going to use it like this. I mean, you could theoretically use it for two-player arcade input, like split it between you and another player, but that experience would really suck, so I don't recommend it. But it's indicative of 8bitdo's attitude towards their users and how they design their products. They really care about the experience, and even if something might not be the most functional feature in the world, they won't shy away from adding it because it offers value that simply doesn't show up on a quick glance at spec sheet. If you're someone who cares about gaming history and cares about playing older games, these controllers will really appeal to you. They're made by and for retro gaming enthusiasts, and you can really tell. I've wished controllers would do something like this for a long time. The face buttons, not necessarily the ball-top joysticks. I'm someone who goes back and forth between different controllers all the time, and I would really rather they just all have the same button layout, because while I can certainly adjust and get back into the groove with a different layout, it adds unnecessary friction to the experience. So this is an absolute godsend for me. Believe me when I tell you, when I got my hands on this controller, it made me seriously consider buying 4 or 5 more of them so I never have to use another controller again, and never have to listen to those couch co-op complaints either. Now, I generally do adhere to the idea that no company is your friend and they're always in it for the money in the end. But it really does seem, after all the cool stuff that they do, like 8bitdo know how to balance the financial demands of capitalism with their users' needs and deliver on what their customers actually want, and what they really seem to understand is that if you simply make a good product that solves people's problems, people will buy your stuff. And 8bitdo really seem to go into every design with that in mind. Do they need to do all the crazy colors? No. Do they need to do cool things like fight pads, ball top joystick toppers, modular face buttons? No. But they do because those things are what their audience will appreciate. And they do it with such incredibly high bars for quality. It's not something I've touched on much in this video, but the quality of this thing is in line with what I expect from major first-party manufacturers, and in some ways even surpasses it. This thing feels incredibly solid, exceptionally well built and designed, and it's instantly become my favorite controller. So much so, it's actually got me reaching for a controller more often than I usually do when I sit down to play games. It just feels that good in my hands. And listen, for a third-party controller, $70 is a lot. That's first-party money, but I think compared to those, what you're getting here with variable sensitivity analog and tactile triggers that you can swap between with the flick of a switch, 4 extra buttons, modular face buttons and joystick toppers, and a full companion app with macros and full button customization, I think the value is absolutely there. And frankly, to me, it makes it really hard to justify paying full price for a first-party controller from any of the major manufacturers. Ultimately, I just think this is a really impressive bit of hardware, and for the price, I haven't used a controller that feels better than this. I'm usually a mouse and keyboard guy for all my games, but after getting this, like I said, I've actually started reaching for it way more often than I ever would have before. If you're not someone who wants to pay $70 for this controller, I get it. It's a lot of money and it's very hard to justify no matter how good the controller is. But I've tried a lot of controllers, both first and third party, and this is the best one I've ever used personally. That's not to say there aren't better ones out there, and for better prices, but to me, there's a lot of value in the kind of design thinking that went into this. And I really enjoy owning products which I can tell the people who made them really cared about. That's something that really does mean a lot to me from a purchasing standpoint, and if that means paying a bit more, I'm okay with that. But you might not be, so I would be interested to hear if you've gotten your hands on one of these, what you think about it, or if you're waiting for yours to come in and you found this video helpful, make sure you leave all your thoughts down in the comments. I always love hearing from you all. But now, with that, I'll just say thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I hope to see you back here next week. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, happy gaming.